Hi, my name is Alex Voigt. I am a social studies teacher at Wayzata Central Middle School, and today I am going to detail out anti-racist pedagogy discussion. Just give you a brief synopsis of what it is, what it entails, and how to implement it. And just given the hot button nature of the topic, it feels like something that has a lot of relevancy. So first, I wanted to quickly detail out why this matters. And in looking at that, well, really what we have to think is that education is often a reflection of society, both good and bad. It can mirror the racism of a community, and it can help perpetuate it if racism isn't directly addressed in some way. Also, as a social studies teacher, I always hit the point that history contextualizes today. Much of what we are exposed to in the classroom has been shaped by historical racial disparities and continues to be that way. There's a reason why schools today are as segregated as they were right around the time of Brown v. Board of Education, and that's the sort of stuff that needs to be examined at both a district level, a system level, and even at a classroom level. Also, because everybody has a racial experience in their life. Even students in predominantly white classrooms are going to have their own racial experience. Myself, being a white male, I do have a racial experience about this. This isn't an issue that is owned by one person or one group, it's owned by everybody. And as educators, if we want our content to resonate with our students, we have to be able to connect it to their experiences and what's going on in the world around them. Also, just in general education, light bulb moments, they're going to be uncomfortable from time to time. That's just the way it is. Discussions about racism from different perspectives, especially when it involves current events that are very problematic, even like looking at the George Floyd situation, those are never going to be easy, but difficult conversations are sometimes needed to grow as a person. It's kind of like when it comes to weightlifting or athletic training. If you want to be good at something from a athletic point of view, it's going to require some hard practices that are going to make you sore afterward. Same thing when it comes to education. If you really want to learn, you have to be willing to experience discomfort in things that are outside of your perspective. Also, and finally, most importantly, race continues to be a relevant issue in today's world. Whether it's the George Floyd situation, the Ahmaud Arbery situation, the situation in Wisconsin involving Kyle Rittenhouse. This isn't going to get better if we ignore the issue and continue to think that we don't want people to experience discomfort. We have to actually address this. And that's where we get into what anti racist pedagogy and discussion is. The advocacy group Race Forward, in the reading we had, defines anti racism as the work of actively opposing racism by advocating for changes in political, economic, and social life. Anti racism tends to be individualized approach set up in opposition to individual racist behavior and impacts. At its core, really, it's about actively acknowledging and opposing racism in your classroom and school environment. And that means things like creating a safe environment where the topic of race can be discussed in a meaningful and academic way, in addition to being able to address racially charged issues as they occur, both in the school and in current events. Social studies teacher alert there, I guess. It is also it means acknowledging that just agreeing to not be racist yourself isn't going to improve society and fix the problems associated with race. We have to be at the forefront of that because that's what education is. It's at the forefront of societal change. If you look at the history of it, change typically comes from the education sphere, and that might help explain why it is something that tends to be a hot button issue. What it entails, first of all, the reading detailed examining your own the existing biases that exist in education. That can be at a systemic level, a school level, a content level, and a personal level. Also, taking steps to remove those biases over time. So, advocating for programs that elevate historically marginalized groups, looking at a systemic level. Maybe rethinking school discipline policies if they tend to inordinately impact one group. Also, considering more inclusive content that covers different perspectives and backgrounds. Also, examining your own biases and reflecting on how to combat them. Then that also entails structured discussion in class about racially relevant topics. And the important parts there, and we'll get to that a bit more later, is having consistent policies and procedures in place, having set prompts in place to spark racial discussions. There were a few really good ones in the reading, including being able to put yourself into history and trying to consider what the response would be to that, and also a couple of them where you have to consider like all sides of an issue and where people are coming from. Also, requiring students to write reflectively, being able to seek out diverse perspectives with academic sources, and taking on the role of a facilitator rather than a director. So basically, from the perspective of a teacher, that's basically serving as more of a you get the ball rolling and the jump ball as a referee, and then you kind of let the kids lead the discussion and you interject whenever you need to. And when it comes to the writing reflectively, I forgot to mention, this is typically done after discussions, so they would detail out what they talked about, how it maybe changed, confirmed, or challenged their own beliefs. And it's just something that you want to try to do consistently with that. And then when it comes to anti-racist pedagogy discussion, preparing to implement it means preparing yourself to be an anti-racist instructor with reflective questions. Some of those questions include things like, am I ready to do this work even when it becomes uncomfortable? Have I learned enough to confidently support this conversation? How have my own experiences shaped my perspective and biases? Do I trust my admin enough to support the pursuit of this topic? That's one that I think in a practical sense, or like in the implementation phase of it, that has to exist in order for this to really truly work. Otherwise, teachers are not going to pursue it the way they need to because they're constantly going to fear that they're going to be on the ropes if there's any sort of pushback from parents. Also, are colleagues ready to pursue this topic as well? That's an extremely important thing to consider because if colleagues are going to be uncomfortable with it, that's going to create some inconsistencies in the experience for students, and it's also going to kind of affect the overall community, the school culture of it. So it is something that everyone needs to be on board with if you want it to be successful. You also need to prepare for any possible issues that may arise. Some of the ones from the reading included students using an offensive term, students misrepresenting data to make a racist or logically flawed argument. There's also a whole bunch of cognitive biases that you can incorporate into that. And if you were teaching a class that was in communications, that would be an awesome inroad to talk about those cognitive biases. So that could be a way of keeping the discussion academic. Also, students using non-academic or clearly biased sources to make an argument, which is going to happen from time to time, and it needs to be called out for what it is, but it needs to be done so in a way that maintains that student's dignity and it allows them an out in order to redeem themselves with it. Also, students disagreeing on a topic in an unproductive manner, if it gets into like a shouting match or an argument or they start personally attacking each other. Also, if there's any sort of expressed parental concern, which does happen from time to time with that, how are you going to be able to address it? What does the process look like? Who do you loop in amongst administration that is going to back you up on that? And then when it comes to how to implement it, I'm interweaving some stuff that I think could be done in different levels, and also what the reading detailed here. At a school and district level, I think a big first step here is the data collection and analysis of racial demographics, and that can break down into a lot of subcategories, both in the income point of view, the extracurriculars point of view, the requirement for free and reduced lunches, and just so many more. There needs to be actual data put in place so you can start looking at actual policy solutions to that data. You also have to have an examination of district policies and practices with regards to discipline, testing, staffing, curriculum offered, services and community outreach. There's a lot of different things that need to be addressed there. You also need to create top-down policies of consistent language and procedures about how to approach the topic. Whether it's through workshop week or professional development, you need to have consistent language and verbiage amongst your staff so that way you actually can consistently address issues as they arise. At a class level, I think a big first step is similar to the school and district level. You have to know the demographics and backgrounds of your students. That's an important first step that most teachers are going to have at the start of the school year, and that's also going to be part of building relationships and connections with your students. You also have to examine your assessments for potential biases and deficiencies. That is super important to do on a regular basis, and you really do have to take a close look at certain questions and try to think if there's any sort of potential where somebody from one background might see it differently. When you do that, it actually is kind of surprising how those biases can seem invisible to one person, but to another person, they don't. You also are going to want to establish the why with your course intentions and also the purpose of those discussions. You want to establish relevancy of it so that kids know that what you're doing isn't just to make them uncomfortable, it is to make them actually understand why this is important. You also want to have clear expectations and guidelines about how students conduct themselves in discussion, and the reading actually mentioned that you should publish those communication guidelines in your syllabus and in your course resources because you want maximum visibility for both students and parents about how this is supposed to work so everybody has something to refer to. And I have never done that before, and I will actually now take that into account. That does seem like something that should be concrete and in place and in as clear language as possible. You're also going to want to examine available academic resources to ensure that they cover a variety of perspectives. And then you also want to set an example of vulnerability and honesty with your students, as well as being willing to learn on your own. And also being able to communicate to students that you are not going to know everything about this and that you're still learning, which is the case for all of us. We are all still learning this in real time. Nobody is going to be the know-it-all expert of it. That's not how this topic works. And then at a personal level, as mentioned before, you really want to make sure that you reflect on your own racial experience and biases, and you also want to consider how those experiences and biases may impact your objectivity in a situation. We all have different lenses that we view things in, and if you're aware of what your lens is, you can at least start to think how to counteract that. And that's something that is Education 101 for starters, but it's also something that helps you examine current events to make you think like, well, okay, I see this way, and maybe it's because of this. Okay, so that's the entirety of what I've got for anti-racist pedagogy and discussion.